SYN injection. The term SYN injection is most commonly used to describe the primary action taken within a SYN flood attack, which is a type of denial of service, DOS, or distributed denial of service, DDoS, attack targeting the TCP protocol. The core idea is to inject a massive, overwhelming volume of TCP SYN, synchronize, packets into the target server, exploiting a vulnerability in the TCP three-way handshake. How the attack works: the half-open connection. The attack specifically targets the connection establishment process of the TCP protocol. 1. The normal handshake. 1. Client-server, SYN, client requests connection. 2. Server-client, SYN ACK, server acknowledges request and responds with its own sync. 3. Client-server, ACK, client acknowledges, connection is established. 2. The SYN injection attack. The attacker initiates the first step of the handshake but deliberately prevents the final step from completing. 1. Injection flood. The attacker sends a massive, continuous flood of SYN packets to the target server's open ports. 2. Server response. For every SYN packet received, the server attempts to establish a connection. It allocates resources, such as memory in the transmission control block, TCB, and sends a SYN ACK back to the sender. The server moves this connection to the SYN_RECV state, waiting for the final ACK. 3. The drop. The attacker either never sends the final ACK or uses IP spoofing by forging the source IP address in the SYN packets. When the server sends the SYN ACK to a spoofed, non-existent, or random IP address, the real device at that address either doesn't exist or ignores the unexpected packet, meaning the final ACK is never returned. The result: resource exhaustion. The server is left with a large number of half-open connections in the SYN_RECV state, waiting for an ACK that will never arrive. 17. Backlog exhaustion. Every server has a limited backlog queue, a defined memory area, for half-open connections. The SYN flood rapidly fills this queue. Denial of service, DOS. Once the backlog queue is full, the server cannot accept any new, legitimate SYN requests from genuine users. 18. New connection attempts are dropped, resulting in a denial of service for all authorized clients. Resource depletion. The server's memory, CPU resources, and network bandwidth are consumed by managing these fake, half-open sessions, making the system sluggish or completely unresponsive. Mitigation. Common mitigation techniques against SYN injection, SYN flood, attacks include, SYN cookies, a server-side technique that avoids allocating resources, like the TCB entry, until the final ACK of the three-way handshake is received, preventing the backlog queue from being filled. Rate limiting, placing limits on the number of new SYN packets a server will accept within a given time frame from a single source or network segment. Increasing the backlog queue size, a simple, though often insufficient, defense that simply raises the threshold before the server is overwhelmed. In cybersecurity, the term SYN injection is largely synonymous with the initial phase of a SYN flood DDoS attack. Detecting a SYN injection attack, SYN flood, often requires monitoring several network and system performance metrics simultaneously. The attack manifests primarily as an accumulation of half-open TCP connections and the resulting resource exhaustion. Here are the key indicators visible when a SYN flood is targeting a server. 1. Network connection indicators, NetStat. The most definitive evidence of a SYN flood is found by examining the TCP connection tables, typically using the NetStat command, or equivalent tools like SS. High volume of SYN_RECV connections. The critical indicator is an unusually high number of connections reported in the SYN_RECV state. These are the half-open connections waiting for the final ACK that the attacker is withholding. Normal servers should have very few, if any, connections in this state for an extended period. During an attack, this count will spike dramatically. Low volume of established connections. Simultaneously, the number of successful, established connections may remain static or even decrease, as legitimate clients cannot complete the handshake due to the backlog queue being full. 2. System performance indicators. A successful SYN flood causes resource exhaustion, leading to noticeable performance degradation. 3. High CPU utilization. The server's CPU usage will spike as it continuously attempts to process the torrent of incoming SYN packets and manages the large number of half-open TCB entries. 4. Memory exhaustion. While less common than TCB exhaustion, the large number of allocated TCBs can consume significant kernel memory, potentially leading to slow performance or system instability. Networking stack overload. The server's network interface will show a high volume of packets being processed, often reaching the capacity of the link, especially for smaller DDoS attacks. 3. Network traffic analysis. Packet sniffers. Analyzing the raw packet traffic provides direct confirmation of the attack pattern. Unidirectional SYN traffic. A packet sniffer, like Wireshark or dump, will show a massive amount of incoming TCP segments with the SYN flag set, all directed at the target port, example port 80 or 443. Lack of corresponding ACKs. There will be a near total absence of the final ACK packets needed to complete the three-way handshake for the observed SYN packets. 5. Source IP diversity. Spoofing. In a sophisticated SYN flood, the source IP addresses of the incoming SYN packets will appear random, changing constantly, or belong to different ranges. 6 This is a telltale sign of IP spoofing, which prevents traceback and ensures the attacker never receives the SYN ACK, thus preventing the connection from closing gracefully. 4 Application level indicators. The user experience. From an end user and application perspective, the denial of service is clear. Failure to connect. Legitimate users will report that they cannot establish a connection to the targeted service. Connection attempts will time out or be immediately reset, as the server cannot put the new request into its full backlog queue. High latency. Even if a connection is established, the general slowness and resource exhaustion on the server can lead to extremely high latency for all services. 7 If you see the combination of a high number of SYN_RECV connections in netstat alongside high CPU usage and dropped legitimate connection attempts, a SYN injection, SYN flood, attack is the most likely cause. Possible mitigation and defense methods for SYN injection. These methods generally fall into 3 categories: network perimeter defenses, operating system tuning, and application-specific controls. Here is a list of possible mitigation and defense methods. Operating system, kernel, tuning. These defenses are implemented directly within the server's TCP/IP stack to make it more resilient to resource exhaustion. SYN cookies, most effective mechanism. When a SYN packet arrives, the server replies with a SYN ACK, but the initial sequence number, ISN, is encoded with information about the client's address and port, the cookie. The server does not allocate any resources, no TCB entry, yet. If the client returns with the final ACK containing the correct cookie, the server verifies it and only then builds the TCB and establishes the connection. Benefit: prevents the backlog queue from being filled with half-open connections, effectively defeating the resource exhaustion vector of the attack. Increasing the SYN backlog queue size. Mechanism: increase the maximum number of half-open connections the kernel is allowed to store in the queue. Example using a system parameter like net.ipv4.tcp_max_SYN_backlog on Linux. Benefit: raises the threshold required to overwhelm the server, but does not solve the underlying problem, as a determined attacker can still flood a larger queue. Decreasing the SYN received timeout. Mechanism: lower the amount of time the server will wait for the final ACK before purging the half-open connection from the backlog. Example using net.ipv4.tcp_SYN_ACK_retries. Benefit: frees up resources more quickly, making the attack less persistent, but risks dropping legitimate connections that are just experiencing high network latency. 2 Network and firewall defenses. These methods rely on network devices, routers, firewalls, load balancers, DDoS scrubbing services, to filter or divert traffic before it reaches the server. Rate limiting. Mechanism: configure firewalls or edge routers to limit the number of new SYN packets accepted per second from any single source IP address, or from all sources globally. Benefit: prevents a single attacker or a moderate-sized botnet from consuming all resources. Drawback: can mistakenly block legitimate users during high-traffic events. Stateless filtering/ACLS. Mechanism: block SYN packets that arrive on an interface that should only see established traffic. Example: block inbound SYN packets originating from internal IP ranges, which often indicates an attack or misconfiguration. Reverse TCP handshake. Passive ACK mechanism: intercepts SYN traffic at the firewall/proxy. The proxy completes the 3-way handshake with the client, acting as the server, and only after the client sends the final ACK does the proxy forward the request to the real server, thus shielding the server from half-open connections. Benefit: highly effective, as the firewall takes the load of the backlog queue. Traffic scrubbing services. DDoS protection providers mechanism: divert all traffic through a specialized provider, example Cloudflare, Akamai. The provider uses huge capacity and advanced heuristics to inspect traffic, filter out the SYN flood, and pass only clean traffic to the origin server. 3 Application and protocol defenses. Use load balancers/proxies with SYN flood protection. Mechanism: ensure load balancers are configured to handle SYN flood traffic robustly. Many modern load balancers implement SYN cookies or reverse handshake mechanisms internally. Disable unused services. Mechanism: shut down any network services, especially those listening on public interfaces, that are not strictly necessary. Benefit: reduces the attack surface and the number of ports the attacker can target. IP blacklisting/whitelisting. Mechanism: if the attack is sourced from a limited, known set of IPs, firewalls can be configured to block traffic from those IPs. Conversely, if only a few clients need access, restrict access to a small list of known legitimate IPs, whitelisting. A robust defense strategy typically involves deploying SYN cookies at the operating system level, combined with rate limiting at the network perimeter. Using dump is an excellent and direct way to check for a SYN injection, SYN flood, attack because it allows you to analyze network traffic in real time and filter specifically for the characteristics of the attack. Here is a step-by-step guide on how to use dump to identify a SYN flood. 1 Basic dump command structure. You will use dump to listen on the relevant network interface and capture only the packets that are initiating a connection. Command syntax: bash sudo dump I interface TCP13 and 2 equals 0 C100NN option / description filter sudo required to capture packets on most systems. I specifies the network interface to listen on, example Eth0, in 0S3, any interface. This is the crucial filter for SYN packets. The 13th byte of the TCP header TCP13 and 2 contains the control flags, and the second bit corresponds to the SYN flag. This equals 0 expression captures all packets with the SYN flag set. Optional, stops the capture after 100 packets. Useful for quick sampling. C100 remove this for continuous monitoring. Non-resolving, prints IP addresses and port numbers numerically, faster and clearer for analysis. 2 key steps for attack detection. Step A, capture the traffic. Run the command on the target server's network interface, specifying the port being attacked, example port 80 for HTTP or 443 for HTTPS. Bash sudo dump ith0 TCP13 and 2 equals 0 and port 80 NN. Step B, analyze the output during a SYN flood. The output will look like a continuous, rapid stream of incoming SYN packets. Sample dump output interpretation 11:25:0 IP 1.12345 An incoming SYN packet, S, from a source IP 192.168.1.10.80, flags S, sec, 1.1.1.1, to the target server, 192.168.1.10, on the 123,456. Target port, 80. 11:25:0 1.12345 IP 2.2.2.2.12345 Another incoming SYN packet from a different 192.168.1.10.80, flags S, sec source, 2.2.2.2. 987,654, the attack indicators, 1 high volume, the timestamps, first column, will show a vast number of these SYN packets arriving extremely close together, sometimes many per millisecond. 2 source diversity, look at the source IP addresses, example 1.1.1.1, 2.2.2.2, etc. If they are all different, random, or belong to different network blocks, it strongly indicates IP spoofing or a large distributed denial of service, DDoS, attack. 3 missing responses, if you run the command without the SYN filter, you can check for the server's response. During an attack, you will see the server send a massive number of SYN ACK packets, S or SA, in response, but you will see very few, if any, final ACK packets, or A, coming back from the supposed clients. 3 Advanced analysis, saving to file. For a more in-depth investigation over a longer period, it's better to save the traffic to a file and analyze it later with a tool like Wireshark. Bash #capture 60 seconds of all SYN traffic on port 80 and save to syn_flood.cap sudo dump ith0 TCP13 and 2 equals 0 and port 80 syn_flood.cap G60 in Wireshark. You can use advanced features to count the packets per second, view statistics on source IP addresses, and calculate the ratio of SYN packets to completed connections. By observing a high, sustained rate of incoming SYN packets without corresponding completion ACKs, you can confirm that a SYN injection attack is actively targeting your system.